The 1950s were a turbulent yet ambitious decade for the Soviet Union. The country had just emerged from the devastation of the Second World War. A conflict that had claimed millions of Soviet lives and left scars across cities and families alike. At the same time, the Soviet state was pushing forward with industrialization, technological progress, and a fierce ideological rivalry with the West in what was now called the Cold War. Amid this backdrop, the concept of the new Soviet person was central, resilient, disciplined, loyal to the collective, and unafraid of hardship, adventure, physical endurance, and the conquering of nature were celebrated not only as hobbies but as vital tools of character building. Universities, youth organizations, and sports clubs actively promoted mountaineering, long ski treks, and winter expeditions as ways to harden the body and cultivate loyalty to Soviet ideals. In the Ural Mountains, which stretch as the natural boundary between Europe and Asia, countless snowy ridges and remote valleys presented both danger and allure. For Soviet youth, they were the perfect proving ground, and it was into this landscape, during the cold winter of 1959, that a group of students set out on a journey that would become one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, the Dyatlov Pass incident. At the center of the story was Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov, born in 1936. At only 23 years old, Dyatlov was in his final year at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, studying radio engineering. Friends and professors alike described him as intelligent, disciplined, and naturally gifted as a leader. Dyatlov's interests extended beyond theory. He was a builder and tinkerer, capable of designing his own radio transmitters and even portable heating systems for use on expeditions. He had already gained a reputation among fellow students for his ability to keep calm under pressure, make quick yet rational decisions, and inspire confidence in difficult circumstances. The winter expedition of 1959 was more than just recreation for Dyatlov. It was designed as a qualification trek that would earn the participants their Grade 3 certification, the highest level awarded to amateur hikers and mountaineers in the Soviet Union at the time. This required demonstrating the ability to survive and navigate in extreme conditions, including multi-day treks in sub-zero temperatures. Every detail was carefully prepared: the route, supplies, skis, tents, diaries, and even homemade equipment. Dyatlov believed in preparedness and believed this trip would be both challenging and rewarding. None of his companions doubted his competence or his dedication. The group initially consisted of 10 people, all of them students or graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Their ages ranged from 20 to 24, except for one older man who joined at the last minute. Each member brought unique strengths to the team. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, a lively and energetic student, the only woman in the group after the departure of another member. Her diary entries reflect both joy and determination, even in difficult conditions. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, the youngest of the expedition, known for her strong-willed and outspoken personality. Her tragic fate, being discovered without a tongue and eyes, would later become one of the case's most chilling mysteries. Rustam Slobodin, 23, athletic and tall, trained in the martial art of Sambo, seen as one of the physically strongest in the group. Nikolai Thibault Brinols, 24, of Russian and French descent, intelligent, gentle, and experienced in long expeditions. Alexander Kolevatov, 24, calm, patient, and known for steady problem-solving under pressure. Yuri Krivonishenko, 23, the joker of the group, always making others laugh. He worked at a secret nuclear facility, a fact that would later raise speculation when radioactive traces were discovered on some of the clothing. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, brave and bold, once confronted a bear on a previous trip, demonstrating his courage. Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, the outsider, much older than the others, a World War II veteran. He joined at the last minute. His background and presence remain subjects of controversy. Yuri Yudin, 21, the 10th member, who would ultimately turn back due to illness early in the journey, thereby escaping the fate of the others. Together, these individuals represented the ideal Soviet youth, technically skilled, physically capable, and infused with the spirit of adventure. They were close-knit friends as well as teammates, When they departed, none of them could have imagined that their journey would end in tragedy and become one of the most enduring enigmas in mountaineering history. The group's destination was Mount Otorden, rising 1.234 meters in the northern Ural Mountains. To the indigenous Mansi people, Otorden carried an ominous name meaning, "Do not go there." For the young hikers, however, such names only added to the mountain's allure. On their way to Otorden, the group needed to cross another peak, Kholat Syakhl, which in Mansi means Mountain of the Dead. The name was not mere superstition. Local lore recalled hunters who had perished there in sudden blizzards, buried by avalanches, or frozen by the brutal winds. The conditions in this region were unforgiving. Winter temperatures could plunge below -30 degrees Celsius. Winds howled across barren ridges, and storms could arise without warning. For the unprepared, such an environment was lethal. Yet for Dyatlov's group, it was precisely the challenge they sought. To conquer these elements would be to prove themselves against nature's harshest tests. The expedition began on January 23, 1959, with high spirits. Photographs preserved from the first days show smiling faces, skis strapped across broad snowy fields, and camaraderie around makeshift campfires. Their diaries, too, reveal a sense of optimism and unity. But on January 28, misfortune struck. Yuri Yudin, who suffered from chronic rheumatism, could not continue. His joints ached severely, and the prospect of harsher terrain ahead forced him to turn back. The others were saddened but encouraged him to rest, promising to return with stories of the mountains. This moment was pivotal. Yudin's decision to retreat spared his life. Decades later, he would describe the pain of being the sole survivor, haunted by the fate of his friends. Yet in that moment, for the rest of the group, the adventure pressed on undiminished. Over the next few days, they advanced deeper into the wilderness. They skied across valleys, sang songs, and kept detailed diaries. Each entry captured the youthful vigor and camaraderie that defined the group. For them, this was not only a physical test but also a celebration of friendship and discovery. On February 1, 1959, the group reached the slopes of Kholat Syakhl. The weather had worsened, strong winds, heavy snowfall, and poor visibility. According to their route plan, they were supposed to descend into the nearby forest for shelter before making their final push toward Otorden. Instead, Dyatlov made a fateful choice, to set up camp on the exposed mountainside. Just below the ridge, historians and investigators still debate this decision. Some argue it was a training exercise, an intentional challenge to test their endurance in harsher conditions. Others believe they simply lost daylight and did not want to descend in the storm. Whatever the reasoning, the group pitched their tent on the barren slope, far from the safety of trees. That night, as winds roared outside, they ate, wrote diary entries, and even took their last photographs. Among the final images is a blurred photograph of what some claim to be streaks of light in the sky, later interpreted by some as evidence of military tests. Meteors, or even UFOs. The night of February 1 slipped into February 2. From that moment onward, no one lived to tell what happened next. The search and the discovery of the abandoned camp. According to the expedition plan, the group led by Igor Dyatlov was expected to return to the village of Vizhay by February 12, 1959. From there, they would send a telegram back to Sverdlovsk to confirm their safe return. When the date came and went with no word, there was little immediate concern. In the Soviet Union, expeditions often ran late due to unpredictable weather, exhaustion, or route changes. It was common for groups to return days behind schedule. Friends and family reassured themselves with this logic. The mountains were vast. Storms were frequent, and the students were experienced. But as the days passed, February 13, 14, 15, anxiety mounted. The parents of the hikers began pressing the Ural Polytechnic Institute for answers. By February 20th, it was clear that the delay was no longer ordinary. Something was wrong. The first organized search party consisted of volunteers, fellow students, teachers, and outdoor enthusiasts from the institute. They were joined by local hunters and guides familiar with the Ural terrain. These initial efforts, though earnest, were limited. The winter mountains were treacherous. Visibility was poor, and resources were scarce. As the urgency grew, the Soviet authorities stepped in. The Red Army dispatched soldiers, helicopters, and aircraft to aid the mission. Dogs were brought in for tracking, though the snow cover proved too thick for scent trails to be reliable. By late February, the search effort had swelled into a large-scale operation involving military units, students, and local Mansi tribesmen. The area to be combed was vast, tens of square kilometers of forest, ridges, and valleys blanketed in deep snow. After days of scouring the slopes, a discovery was made on February 26 by a group of student searchers. On a barren slope of Kholat Syakhl, partially covered by snow, they found a tent. At first glance, the tent appeared collapsed and abandoned, but upon closer inspection, the searchers were struck by a detail that would become one of the case's most haunting mysteries. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. This was not the result of storm damage or careless packing. Someone inside had deliberately cut their way out. The cuts were jagged, made in haste, as if the occupants had been desperate to escape. Inside the tent, everything was in disarray. Blankets, diaries, food supplies, even shoes and warm clothing were left behind. Most chilling of all, nearly all the hikers' boots and heavy coats remained neatly arranged, untouched. In the subarctic conditions of the Urals, no rational person would have left without them, unless forced by sheer panic. The discovery left searchers unnerved. Why would 9 experienced hikers flee their only shelter into a deadly blizzard? Barefoot or in socks? What could have driven them to such irrational behavior? Outside the tent, searchers found a line of footprints leading down the slope toward the forest. Remarkably, the prints were clear and distinct, preserved in the snow as though frozen in time. The footprints told a peculiar story. Some prints showed bare feet, others only socks. A few indicated one shoe or light footwear. They moved calmly in single file, not in a chaotic scatter. This suggested that the hikers had not been chased, but had left in an orderly manner. The tracks stretched for about 1.5 kilometers down the slope, before vanishing near the edge of a dense forest. To the searchers, this only deepened the mystery. The hikers had not stampeded in panic, nor struggled with an external attacker. They had simply walked, half-dressed, in lethal cold, into the night. Those who participated in the discovery later spoke of an eerie, unsettling mood. The tent on the mountainside seemed less like an abandoned campsite and more like the stage of a frozen tragedy. Many of the volunteers were fellow students and friends of the missing hikers. They were shaken by the evidence of sudden, inexplicable terror. At the same time, they clung to hope. Perhaps the group had taken shelter in the forest and was waiting for rescue. The arrival of the military added a heavier atmosphere. Soldiers cordoned off the site, documented every item, and photographed the scene. To the civilians, it felt as if the mystery had just deepened into something larger, perhaps something the authorities already suspected but did not reveal. News of the discovery began circulating in Sverdlovsk and beyond. Although the Soviet press was tightly controlled, word of mouth spread quickly, and rumors blossomed. Some speculated that the hikers had been attacked by local Mansi tribesmen. Yet the footprints showed only the hikers' tracks, no sign of outsiders. Others whispered of an avalanche forcing the group to cut their way out of the tent and flee. But the tent's location on a gentle slope and the lack of avalanche debris made this improbable. A more sinister theory suggested the group had stumbled into a secret military test zone, perhaps encountering weapons or substances that drove them into panic. Among the searchers, a quiet dread took hold. The more they uncovered, the less sense it made. After examining the tent and the line of footprints, the search teams turned their attention downhill, toward the forest where the trail had ended. Somewhere among the trees, they believed, lay the missing hikers, alive or dead. The forest loomed dark and dense, branches heavy with snow. For the rescuers, each step into the woods felt like entering another world, where answers might await but where the shadows held only silence. They did not yet know that what they would find under those trees would shock them to their core, and transform a rescue mission into the investigation of one of the most puzzling tragedies of the 20th century. From the perspective of modern investigators, the abandoned tent remains one of the central puzzles of the Dyatlov Pass case. Several key facts can be extracted from the discovery. The cuts from inside, The fact that the tent was slashed from within indicates a sudden need to escape. Bypassing the entrance flaps, this suggests the hikers were either trapped or perceived in immediate danger. Clothing and equipment left behind, in temperatures well below freezing. Abandoning warm clothing, boots, and stoves is essentially suicidal. Whatever happened must have overridden rational survival instincts. Orderly footprints, the calm, single-file departure undermines the notion of total panic. It implies a collective decision to leave the tent, rather than a chaotic flight. No signs of external attack, no footprints of strangers, no blood, no signs of violence at the camp. The threat, if there was one, was either internal, environmental, or psychological. For many, these details point not to a physical enemy but to an invisible force, whether a natural phenomenon, a psychological trigger, or something even more elusive. By the end of February 26th, the search teams had made their breakthrough but were left with more questions than answers. The hikers' only shelter had been abandoned under bizarre circumstances. Their tracks vanished into the forest. The searchers knew the next step was to follow the footprints into the woods. What they would find there: first 2 bodies beneath a cedar tree, then others scattered across the snow, would turn a strange disappearance into a haunting mystery. The Dyatlov Pass incident was no longer just about lost hikers. It had become a case that would baffle investigators, scientists, and conspiracy theorists for decades to come. The first bodies and the horrific clues. After discovering the abandoned tent, the search parties, composed of students, soldiers, and hunters, decided to move deeper into the forest where the tracks had vanished. The snow was knee-deep. The wind howled relentlessly, but hope still drove them forward. Perhaps the Dyatlov group was alive, sheltering somewhere among the trees. The forest at the base of Kholat Syakhl was dense and hauntingly silent. Thick snow blanketed the ground, erasing most traces of human presence. Every broken branch or dark patch of snow became a possible clue. Step by step, the rescuers combed the area, scanning for fragments of clothing, broken twigs, or the faint remains of a fire. Then, in the midst of the lifeless white, they finally stumbled upon undeniable signs of human struggle. About 1.5 kilometers from the tent, the searchers came across a clearing beneath a tall cedar tree. The snow there was trampled, and traces of a fire were visible. Charred wood and darkened snow marked the spot. This was the first proof. Some of the hikers had made it this far and tried to survive. Not far from the extinguished fire, 2 bodies were found, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. The sight was horrifying. Both men were nearly naked. They wore only light undershirts and underwear. No boots, no jackets. Their bare feet were frozen solid. Their bodies bore cuts, bruises, and burns on their hands, suggesting they had desperately tried to build and maintain the fire. Even stranger were the cedar branches above them, broken at a height of 4 to 5 meters. It seemed the men had climbed the tree, perhaps to look for their comrades, perhaps to escape something unseen. But what had driven them to such extremes in the midst of a deadly snowstorm? The rescuers pressed on, combing the snowy expanse between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent. Before long, they discovered 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, was found lying on his back, facing the direction of the tent, as if he had been struggling to return. He wore a light coat, wool pants, and socks, insufficient for the brutal cold. His body froze mid-movement, locked in a futile attempt at survival. Zenaida Kolmogorova lay not far away, also poorly dressed, her face contorted in pain. Like Igor, she appeared to have collapsed while trying to make her way back. Rustam Slobodin was found face down in the snow. Unlike the others, he bore a significant injury, a fracture in his skull. Experts would later conclude that the trauma was not immediately fatal, but it indicated he had suffered a powerful blow before succumbing to the cold. The positioning of the bodies told a grim story. The group had split. Some had stayed at the cedar tree, while others had attempted to return to the tent for supplies. None had made it. By early March 1959, 5 members of the Dyatlov expedition had been located. The official cause of death for all was initially recorded as hypothermia. But details surrounding their deaths refused to align with simple explanations. Why had they left the tent without proper clothing, even though their gear was still inside? Why were Doroshenko and Krivonishenko half naked, with burns on their hands and signs of having climbed a tree in desperation? Why did Slobodin have a fractured skull? Accident, or violence? These questions unsettled the rescuers and would soon spark a wave of speculation. While 5 bodies had been found, 4 hikers were still missing: Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brinols, and Semyon Zolotaryov. Search teams scoured the forest, probing deep snowdrifts and ravines. But winter in the Urals was merciless. Blizzards erased traces within hours, and the landscape seemed determined to conceal its secrets. Through March and April, the Dyatlov Pass remained a place of dread. Families grieved, yet demanded answers. Rumors swirled across Sverdlovsk. The students had encountered something inexplicable, something neither natural nor human. The Soviet government, under pressure, issued a preliminary report. The 5 hikers had died of exposure. No evidence of external attack. The document stated flatly, the file was temporarily closed. But those who had seen the bodies firsthand were not satisfied. The cuts in the tent, the broken branches, the semi-naked corpses, and Slobodin's fractured skull were left unexplained. The opacity of the investigation only fueled speculation. Some whispered of secret military tests. Others dared to speak of extraterrestrials. In the paranoid atmosphere of the Cold War, every theory, no matter how outlandish, gained traction. The discovery of the 5 bodies provided more questions than answers. Investigators and families alike were left grappling with disturbing possibilities. What had they seen or heard inside the tent that made them flee without boots or coats? Why had they chosen different survival strategies, some staying by the cedar fire, others trying to return? Was Slobodin's skull injury an accident, or was there violence within the group, or from something else? Without the missing 4, the puzzle remained incomplete. The rescuers knew the final answers, or the most terrifying clues, still lay hidden under the snow. As weeks dragged on, the Dyatlov Pass became synonymous with dread. Students at the Ural Polytechnic Institute mourned their classmates. Parents demanded accountability, convinced that the government was withholding the truth. The local Mansi people found themselves under suspicion. Some outsiders spread rumors that the hikers had been killed for trespassing on sacred land. Mansi leaders vehemently denied it, pointing out the lack of evidence and decrying the slander. Meanwhile, searchers continued digging through meters of snow, knowing the bodies of the remaining hikers had to be somewhere nearby. What they could not know was that those 4 would reveal injuries so severe and bizarre that they would forever cement the Dyatlov Pass incident as a legend of the macabre. Today, with decades of hindsight, investigators and experts offer tentative explanations for the anomalies of the first 5 bodies. Paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where victims of hypothermia feel burning heat and remove clothing in the final stages of freezing. This might explain why some were nearly naked. Strategic splitting. The group divided. One faction tried to stay alive at the cedar tree, while others attempted to retrieve supplies from the tent. Both plans ended in death. Slobodin's skull injury, possibly the result of a fall onto hard ice or rocks while disoriented. Yet questions linger about the force required in the absence of other corresponding injuries. These rationalizations explain some aspects, but not all. The sheer strangeness of the situation leaves gaps that logic alone cannot bridge. By late March 1959, hopes of finding the remaining hikers alive had vanished. The forest seemed unwilling to give up its secrets. But in May, as the snow melted, the last 4 bodies would finally be found. And with them came revelations so gruesome, crushed chests, missing eyes, and torn tongues, that the Dyatlov mystery would escalate from tragedy to legend. If the first 5 had puzzled investigators, the last 4 would terrify them. From that point onward, the Dyatlov Pass was no longer just an unsolved accident. It became one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. After the first 5 bodies were discovered in February and early March of 1959, the atmosphere surrounding the Dyatlov Pass grew heavier with dread. The tragedy was undeniable, but 4 hikers were still missing: Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brinols, and Semyon Zolotaryov. Search parties refused to give up. They widened their search grid, digging through drifts of snow, examining tree lines, ravines, and every crevice of the forest floor. But the Ural winter was merciless. Snow lay between 3 and 5 meters deep, swallowing any trace of human presence. Weeks dragged into months. March gave way to April, with blizzards repeatedly halting the search. The families of the missing students pressed authorities harder than ever. Their grief was sharpened by suspicion. Why were official reports so evasive? So unwilling to explain the obvious anomalies? It was not until May 4, 1959, as the snow began to melt, that the mountains finally surrendered their final secret. One of the search teams noticed broken branches and disturbed saplings near a small stream about 75 meters downhill from the cedar tree where Doroshenko and Krivonishenko had perished. Intrigued, they probed the snow. Beneath several meters of hard-packed ice, they found a hollow space formed naturally over the creek. Inside that snow cave lay the 4 remaining bodies. The rescuers froze in shock. The hikers lay in positions that suggested both chaos and desperation. Some bodies were partially atop one another, others curled on their sides, as if seeking warmth or shielding a companion. Lyudmila Dubinina, her body bore catastrophic injuries. Her ribcage was crushed inward, multiple ribs broken. Even more gruesome, her tongue was missing, and so were her eyes and portions of soft facial tissue. Nikolai Thibault-Brynolz, his skull was fractured by a massive blow, with damage inconsistent with an ordinary fall. Semyon Zolotaryov, like Dubinina, his chest was crushed, ribs shattered. Strangely, he was better dressed than most, wearing multiple layers including a fur jacket and boots, perhaps scavenged from dead companions. Alexander Kolevatov, his injuries were less extreme, but his clothing too bore signs of hurried exchange and rearrangement. To those present, it was immediately clear, these deaths could not be explained away as mere hypothermia. Forensic specialists were summoned. Their examinations only deepened the horror. Crushing force equal to a car accident, the impact to Dubinina and Zolotaryov's chests was likened to the trauma seen in high-speed automobile collisions. Yet, bizarrely, there were no external soft tissue injuries, no torn skin, no massive bruising, to correspond with the shattered bones beneath. The skull fracture of Thibault-Brynolz, a massive crack split his skull. But again, the skin was largely intact. The force required to cause such damage, without external trauma, puzzled every expert who examined the case. The missing tongue and eyes. Pathologists suggested the losses could have resulted from natural decomposition in a wet environment. The bodies had lain in running water for months. But families, journalists, and later researchers have never accepted this explanation fully. The deeper the investigators looked, the more impossible the story became. An additional, inexplicable clue surfaced during testing. Traces of radiation were found on some of the clothing. Dubinina and Kolevatov's garments registered levels above natural background radiation. While not instantly lethal, the readings were significant enough to raise alarms. How could students on a routine ski expedition have come into contact with radioactive materials? Did they stumble into a contaminated zone? Or was the tragedy tied to a classified Soviet military experiment gone wrong? Equally strange was the redistribution of clothing among the dead. Dubinina wore Krivonishenko's sweater. Zolotaryov was wrapped in Doroshenko's coat. The evidence painted a haunting picture of the survivors scavenging garments from fallen friends, clinging desperately to life as the storm closed in. Under mounting public pressure, Soviet authorities issued their final conclusion. The report's language was cryptic, even chilling. The deaths of the hikers were caused by an unknown compelling force which they were unable to overcome. Rather than clarity, the phrase opened floodgates of speculation. Theories multiplied. Some whispered the hikers were murdered by Mansi tribesmen angered at trespass. Others suspected a botched military test, parachute mines, vacuum bombs, or radiation experiments. More imaginative voices claimed UFOs or supernatural forces were to blame. Yet none of these theories addressed the central enigma. Why did the hikers slash open their tent and flee half-clothed into a brutal snowstorm? When the bodies were finally returned to Sverdlovsk, grief engulfed the city. Funerals drew large crowds. Parents wept openly, their sorrow inflamed by disbelief. The Dubinina family in particular rejected the official explanations. How could they accept that their daughter's tongue and eyes were simply lost to nature? They accused the state of concealing a catastrophe, perhaps even of direct responsibility. But the Soviet Union, in the throes of the Cold War, met public outcry with silence. Files were sealed, discussion discouraged. The Dyatlov case was officially closed, though unofficially it became a whispered legend. Decades later, researchers revisited the Dyatlov files, armed with new scientific tools. Some hypotheses emerged. Avalanche. A small, localized avalanche may have forced the group to flee the tent. The crushing injuries could result from snow and ice collapsing onto the ravine where they took shelter. Yet searchers at the time reported no clear avalanche evidence. Infrasound panic. Wind conditions on the slopes may have produced low-frequency sound waves, inducing irrational terror that drove the group from the tent. Still, this fails to explain the severe internal injuries. Military testing. Some believe the hikers wandered into the path of secret weapons tests, parachute mines or thermobaric charges. This could account for both blunt trauma and traces of radiation, but no declassified documents confirm it. Natural decomposition. The missing tongue and eyes could be explained by months of immersion in water. Yet the timing and condition fuel persistent doubt. Each theory patches some holes but leaves others gaping. The discovery of the final 4 bodies did not bring closure. Instead, it transformed the Dyatlov Pass tragedy into legend. The deaths were not just the loss of 9 young explorers. They symbolized something larger: the fragility of human life against nature, the shadows of secrecy in Soviet history, and the enduring power of the unknown. Today, the phrase, Dyatlov Pass, evokes not a location, but an enigma. It is the name of a place where human courage, terror, and mystery converged, and where, even 6 decades later, the snow still hides the full truth. After all 9 bodies were recovered, the Soviet prosecutor's office was forced to launch an official inquiry. From the very beginning, however, the case bore the mark of formality and concealment. Forensic experts were summoned, but their conclusions were kept within strict boundaries. Critical questions: why the group abandoned the tent? Why some suffered devastating injuries? Why traces of radiation were found, were left unanswered. Sensitive details were omitted or removed from the case files, and many documents were stamped as classified. The final report, released in May 1959, stated, "The cause of death was due to an overwhelming force which the hikers were not able to overcome." The phrase, overwhelming force, nepriodolima sila, became infamous, ominous yet so vague as to be meaningless. Families of the victims were outraged. They suspected a cover-up, perhaps linked to secret military experiments. But in the tense climate of the Cold War, dissenting voices were silenced. The Dyatlov case was closed in 1959 and would not be officially reopened for decades. As soon as information trickled out, a multitude of theories emerged. They can be grouped into several categories. The avalanche theory. This is the safe explanation, endorsed by many modern investigators. It suggests that a small slab avalanche slid down and struck the tent. The hikers panicked, slashed the tent open, and fled. Some were severely injured by the pressure of snow and ice. In their attempt to seek shelter, they gradually froze to death. Strengths. Explains why they fled the tent and accounts for some injuries. Weaknesses. No clear signs of a large avalanche were present at the site. The slope was relatively shallow, and the tent remained partially exposed when found. The Mansi attack theory. Some early investigators suspected the local Mansi people, but this was quickly dismissed because the Mansi were known to be friendly and had no conflict with students. No evidence of hand-to-hand combat or weapons was found. The injuries were far too extreme to be caused by human violence alone. The criminal or internal conflict theory. Some speculated that a fight broke out among the group, yet the peculiar injuries, crushed chests, fractured skulls without external wounds, could not be explained by simple brawling. The military experiment theory. This remains the most haunting hypothesis. According to it, the Dyatlov group stumbled into a zone of secret Soviet weapons testing. Thermobaric bombs, mines, or acoustic weapons could have caused massive internal trauma without leaving external marks. Radiation traces on clothing supported the suspicion of nuclear-related testing. Witnesses in nearby villages claimed to see strange glowing orbs in the sky that night, possibly missile or rocket tests. Weakness. No direct evidence. Since all relevant military archives remain highly classified. UFOs and paranormal forces. As international media sensationalized the case, theories of UFOs, strange creatures, or supernatural forces circulated, lacking scientific basis. They nonetheless reflected how the tragedy defied ordinary explanation. After the Soviet Union collapsed, previously classified documents were declassified. Journalists, independent researchers, and even former officials revisited the Dyatlov Pass case. By the 1990s, the incident had gripped Russian and global attention. Books, documentaries, and even horror fiction drew inspiration from it. In 2013, amateur investigators organized expeditions to the site, attempting to reconstruct events. In 2019, the Russian prosecutor's office reopened the case, reviewing 75 possible scenarios before concluding that the most likely explanation was a small avalanche combined with harsh environmental conditions. In 2020, their official report declared it a natural accident. Yet public skepticism persisted. Many believe the modern Russian government also preferred to close the case quietly, avoiding scrutiny of potential Soviet-era military experiments. Despite the avalanche conclusion, many disturbing details remain. Why did they abandon the tent without boots or coats in -30°C weather? Who cut the tent from inside? And why did they never return for their gear? What caused the bizarre injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, missing tongue and eyes? Where did the radiation on their clothing come from? Why were investigation files hastily closed, with documents sealed or removed? These unanswered questions ensure that Dyatlov Pass remains an enduring enigma. More than 6 decades later, Dyatlov Pass has become a global symbol of mystery. For Russians, it recalls the dark legacy of the Soviet era, when truth was often buried beneath secrecy. For the world, it represents a chilling tale at the crossroads of brutal nature, primal fear, and the unknown. For scientists, it is a riddle about physiology, psychology, and survival in extreme environments. Today, the Dyatlov Pass Trail still exists, drawing adventurers who wish to retrace the doomed expedition. A memorial stands at the site, where visitors leave flowers, candles, and whispered words. We have not forgotten. Despite countless investigations, the Dyatlov Pass incident leaves behind a vast void. It is not only the death of 9 hikers, but also a mirror reflecting humanity's helplessness before the forces of nature, the silence of governments before uncomfortable truths, the power of mysteries that transcend human comprehension. Perhaps Dyatlov Pass was nothing more than a tragic accident, or perhaps it holds the key to truths the world is not yet ready to confront. Either way, the Dyatlov Pass mystery will forever linger in human memory, reminding us that some questions may never have answers.